I never thought I'd see bulldozers carving through the same soil my grandfather once bled into. But when I stood at the edge of Maple Ridge East, watching those machines tear up the land I grew up on, I realized something impossible had happened. Someone had built 68 brand-new homes on my family's property. Not near it, not beside it, on it. And every one of them had a sold sign out front. You could call it a mistake, a clerical error, a misunderstanding lost in old county files. But I knew better. This wasn't an accident, it was theft. And the face behind that theft? A woman named Lucinda Ward, president of the Maple Ridge HOA. The kind of person who never raised her voice because she didn't have to. The kind who smiled while stabbing you in the back with a rulebook. At first, I thought I could talk to her, explain, show her the deeds, the surveys, the proof that the land was still mine. But she wasn't interested in proof. She was interested in power. And that's when I realized this wasn't just about property lines or paperwork. It was about control, about how far a single person or an entire system would go to protect their illusion of authority. Because what started as a simple boundary dispute would spiral into something far darker. Falsified signatures, forged maps, harassment, even threats. And the deeper I dug, the more I realized the HOA wasn't just hiding one crime, they were built on it. I can still remember the night I found my grandfather's letter, the one that began with, "If you're reading this, it means someone finally tried it." That was the moment everything changed. The moment I stopped being a victim and started fighting back. By the end of it, I didn't just own my family's land again. I owned every single house they'd built on it. But before you decide whose side you're on, let me ask you this. If someone stole everything your family ever worked for, would you fight to take it back? Or would you burn it all down to make sure they never forgot? Brookdale wasn't the kind of town that made the news. It wasn't famous or trendy, or even particularly beautiful. It was quiet. The kind of place where time didn't move so much as it drifted. There were no high-rises or traffic jams, no fancy restaurants or nightclubs. Just wide stretches of farmland, a church that rang its bell every Sunday without fail, and a handful of streets that curved lazily past oak. Trees older than anyone still, alive to remember when they were saplings, and at the far edge of town, where the pavement turned to gravel, and the horizon opened up into endless fields. That's where my grandfather's farm used to stand. Harris Acres, 320 acres of hard-earned land, rich soil, and sweat. My grandfather used to say the land remembered the people who respected it and punished those who didn't. I didn't really understand what he meant until much later. Back then, I was just a kid with dirt on my shoes and sunburned shoulders, racing through rows of corn and getting scolded for tearing my jeans on barbed wire fences. After he passed, I left Brookdale, went off to the city, got a steady job, paid my bills, and tried to build a life that didn't smell like hay and diesel fuel. I told myself I'd come back one day and fix up the old house, maybe turn the farm into something new. But years passed, and I didn't. Life got busy. The farm stayed a memory. That was until the call came. When Mrs. Atkins told me they were building homes on my family's land, I thought she'd lost her mind. The idea of anyone paving over my grandfather's fields felt like a bad joke. But as I made the drive back, something inside me twisted tighter with every mile. By the time I reached the old county line, I could already see the rooftops in the distance, neat rows of beige and white, like someone had dropped a suburban mold onto the countryside. Maple Ridge East. That was the name painted on the massive wooden sign at the entrance. Fresh flowers planted at its base. A slogan underneath in cursive gold letters, "Where Community Begins." I slowed the truck as I rolled down the newly paved road. It didn't feel like Brookdale anymore. It felt like something else, something sterile. Every house looked exactly the same, down to the mailbox and driveway length. Families were out walking dogs, sprinklers hissed across perfect lawns, and kids rode bikes along the sidewalks. It was too clean, too controlled. At the far end of the development sat a temporary trailer labeled Sales and HOA Office. That's where I met her, Lucinda Ward. Lucinda had the kind of presence that filled a room before she even spoke. Perfect posture, hair pinned so tight it didn't dare move, and a pearl necklace that probably cost more than my truck. She smiled when I introduced myself, but her eyes didn't. "Mr. Harris," she said, her tone syrupy and polite. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding." I told her who I was. That the land her development sat on was Harris property, that it had been in my family for generations. She didn't flinch. Instead, she gestured toward a stack of glossy brochures on her desk. "Maple Ridge was purchased by the development company in 1995, she said. "Everything's legal." I assure you, the way she said it, calm, confident, final, made me feel like I was the one trespassing. When I pressed, she smiled wider. "You're welcome to verify the records yourself, of course, but the sale is long settled. Perhaps your grandfather neglected to mention it before his passing." It was a subtle dig, but it landed like a punch. I left that trailer with a sour taste in my mouth and a feeling I couldn't shake. Something was wrong, not just with her words, but with the way everyone around her seemed rehearsed. The construction workers who avoided eye contact, the homeowners who smiled too quickly before retreating indoors. It was like this neighborhood wasn't built on soil, but on secrets. That night, I stayed at a cheap motel off Route 14. The air conditioner rattled, and the ceiling leaked in the corner, but I barely noticed. I just kept replaying Lucinda's voice in my head, the way she said, "Perhaps your grandfather forgot." The next morning, I drove out to the farmhouse. The porch sagged, the shutters hung crooked, but the house was still standing, stubborn as ever. Mrs. Atkins was waiting out front with her usual kindness and 2 glasses of sweet tea, like nothing had changed in 20 years. "I told you it wasn't right," she said, shaking her head. Those people came in all smiles, waving papers around. Said the county approved it. Nobody checked twice. We sat there for a long time, listening to the cicadas. Then she handed me an envelope she'd found while clearing out my grandfather's old workshop. Inside was his handwriting, rough, shaky, but unmistakable. "If you're reading this, it means someone finally tried it. Check the floorboards under my desk. You'll find what they can't bury." When I pried those floorboards open, I found a rusted metal box filled with papers, old survey maps, deeds, receipts, and right on top, a will naming me the sole heir of Harris Acres, every inch of it. That was the first crack in Maple Ridge's perfect facade. In the days that followed, I began to see how deep their control ran. The HOA wasn't just a group of volunteers trying to keep lawns tidy. It was a machine. And Lucinda was the one pulling every lever. She had her inner circle, each one more eager to please her than the last. There was Barry Thompson, the vice president, a balding insurance broker who treated the HOA rules like scripture. He smiled too often, especially when delivering bad news. Then there was Ellen Marks, the treasurer, known for her meticulous record-keeping, though rumors said she'd once been caught skimming from the maintenance fund. And finally there was Todd Whitman, the enforcer, a retired cop who took it upon himself to patrol the neighborhood at all hours, issuing warnings for everything from faded mailbox paint to children's chalk drawings on the sidewalk. Together, they were a wall, not removable, untouchable. And every homeowner beneath them learned quickly that compliance wasn't optional. I watched them in action one afternoon as I parked near the new development. A young couple was outside, planting sunflowers along their fence. Lucinda and Barry walked up the driveway, clipboards in hand. I couldn't hear their words, but I could see the couple's faces fall. By the time Lucinda turned to leave, the flowers were being ripped out by the roots. Later, I found out why. Non-compliant flora species. That was Maple Ridge's version of justice. Order without mercy. As I began digging into the land records, I noticed more red flags. The county file on Harris Acres looked wrong, dates that didn't line up, a signature from 1998 that didn't match my grandfather's handwriting. And then there was the zoning map. Coordinates shifted by just enough to expand Maple Ridge's boundaries into my family's property. It wasn't a mistake. It was a setup. The deeper I looked, the more resistance I met. County clerks suddenly misplaced files. HOA members left anonymous notes on my windshield. And Lucinda herself made sure to remind me, ever so sweetly, that I was disturbing the peace by revisiting old history. Still, I couldn't stop. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the newly built rooftops, I stood by the old fence line. The air smelled of cut grass and concrete dust. I thought about my grandfather, about his calloused hands and the way he'd lean on his shovel at dusk, surveying his land like a captain watching over his ship. He always said the land would take care of those who respected it. I wondered what he'd think now. Seeing it buried under asphalt and mortgages, that was when I noticed something odd. An old stone marker, half buried beneath a pile of dirt near the edge of a retention pond. I brushed it clean. Carved into its surface were faint letters, Harris Boundary, 1915. The original property line, still standing, still marking the truth, even if no one else cared to see it. I took that as a sign. The following day, I went to see an old family acquaintance, Victor Tran, an attorney who'd once helped my grandfather with a tax issue decades earlier. He was older now, slower, but sharp as ever. When I laid the documents in front of him, he barely glanced up before saying, "You might want to sit down." He explained what a quiet title case was, a legal process to reclaim ownership of land when titles had been wrongfully transferred. But he warned me it wouldn't be simple. These people, he said, they don't lose quietly. And he was right. Within a week of filing, I received my first fine, $250 for unauthorized access to Maple Ridge property. Then another, illegal storage of unregistered equipment, referring to my grandfather's rusted tractor. Each letter came in a bright yellow envelope, signed neatly by Lucinda Ward. It didn't stop there. The HOA started sending out newsletters painting me as an agitator, a disgruntled outsider threatening community stability. They even called a meeting to address local concerns, where Lucinda stood before the homeowners and told them I was trying to take their houses. For many, it worked. Some residents began glaring at me when I drove by, others avoided me altogether. But a quiet few, started whispering. I could see the unease in their eyes. Maybe they'd seen too much. Maybe they'd paid too many unexplained fees. Maybe they'd noticed the cracks in Lucinda's perfect empire. Mrs. Atkins once told me, "Evil doesn't always wear horns, Daniel. Sometimes it wears pearls and smiles like a neighbor." She was right. As the weeks passed, the tension in Maple Ridge thickened like summer air before a storm. The lawns were perfect, the mailboxes straight, the smiles rehearsed. But beneath it all was a hum of fear. People were starting to see it too, that their so-called community wasn't a neighborhood. It was a kingdom, and Lucinda was its queen. And that's when I made a promise to myself. No matter what it took, the fines, the threats, the sleepless nights, I was going to bring the truth to light. I wasn't just fighting for my grandfather's land anymore. I was fighting to tear down the walls they built around everyone's silence, because somewhere in those forged signatures and buried boundaries was a story that needed to be unearthed. And I was the only one left who knew where to dig. It started small. They always start small. The first notice came folded neatly in a white envelope, slipped under my windshield while I was fixing a fence post near the edge of the old property. I thought it might be another warning about trespassing from Lucinda's office, but when I unfolded it, I actually laughed. Violation. Grass exceeding 2.5 inches in height. Fine. $75. I stood there, reading it twice. The ground beneath. My boots wasn't even officially inside Maple Ridge's boundary, at least not according to the maps I dug up, but that didn't stop them. A few tufts of wild grass near the property line were apparently enough to trigger an aesthetic disruption. I thought about ignoring it, but that was their game. They wanted me to ignore it, to miss a deadline, to give them ammunition. So instead, I wrote back, short, polite, and very deliberate. I explained the grass was on private property, that the HOA had no jurisdiction, and that any further contact would be considered harassment. 2 days later, I got a response, not from Lucinda, but from Barry Thompson, the vice president. It was longer, colder, and signed with his usual fake warmth. "Mr. Harris, The Maple Ridge HOA maintains all perimeter standards for community continuity. Your property's visible state directly affects neighborhood value. Please consider this. Your final warning before escalation to the Compliance Board. I didn't know what a Compliance Board was, but it sounded like something invented to make regular people feel small. By week's end, I had 3 more notices, one for unauthorized signage. The no trespassing sign my grandfather had nailed up 40 years ago, one for excessive vehicle noise, my old truck backfiring as I pulled in, and one for unapproved structure placement. That last one referred to the barn. That was the moment I realized they weren't just being petty. They were building a case. Every few days, another letter came, sometimes slipped under the door of my grandfather's old farmhouse, sometimes taped to the fence. Once left right on the hood of my truck with a yellow smiley sticker, Barry's idea of humor, and always the same polished signature at the bottom. Lucinda Ward, HOA President. The thing about harassment is, it doesn't come crashing down all at once. It drips, slow, steady, corrosive. The kind that wears you down, grain by grain, until you stop realizing how much of yourself you've lost trying to fight it. By mid-June, I'd started noticing small changes around the property. My mailbox, which sat just outside the old fence line, had been repainted a uniform white. My grandfather's nameplate, the one that had hung there for decades, was gone, replaced by a plastic plaque reading Lot 113B. I drove straight to the HOA trailer. Lucinda was waiting, as if she'd known I'd come. "Ah, Mr. Harris," she said smoothly, flipping through a file on her desk. "I assume this is about the signage correction?" "Correction?" I asked, holding up my phone with a photo of the replaced mailbox. That wasn't a correction. That was vandalism. Her smile didn't even twitch. Community uniformity requires consistent mailbox design. Your prior fixture was outdated and non-compliant. Consider it a courtesy upgrade. "You touched my property," I said, my voice low. She folded her hands. "We maintained community standards. You should be thanking us." That was the first time I saw her lose composure. Just a flicker, a tightening around the eyes when I leaned closer and whispered, "You know this land isn't yours, right? You can build your homes, plant your little gardens, but underneath it all, it's still mine." Her smile came back, sharp as glass. Not for long. That night I couldn't sleep. Not because of fear, not yet, but because of noise. A low rumble, steady and rhythmic. I walked outside and saw the glow of headlights down by the old oak grove, construction equipment. At midnight. They were extending a drainage trench, or at least that's what they'd claim later, but the trench cut directly through the property boundary marked by my grandfather's old stones. When I approached, one of the workers waved me off. "Talk to the HOA," he said. "We just dig where they tell us." I recorded the whole thing. The next morning I sent the footage to Victor, my lawyer. He didn't mince words. "They're baiting you," he said. "They want you to lose your temper, trespass, make a scene. The moment you cross that line, they'll have you arrested for harassment or interference. Don't give them the satisfaction. Easier said than done, because as the days passed, they found new ways to push. One morning, I woke up to find a bright orange sticker slapped across my truck windshield, "Unregistered vehicle, towing pending." Another day, they sent a letter claiming my barn was a fire hazard and needed immediate demolition approval. Then came the complaints. Anonymous, but everyone knew who sent them. The neighbor's dog barked past, quiet hours. The old man in the truck blocked the intersection. The barn smells of chemical storage. Each report came with fines. Each fine came with new language, escalating penalties, loss of privileges, legal review pending. The absurdity of it might have been funny if it wasn't so relentless. I tried reasoning with the neighbors, but that was another trap. First, there was Martha Jenkins, the self-appointed neighborhood watch coordinator. She was in her late 50s, always dressed in pastel sweatshirts and clutching her clipboard like a weapon. She'd show up at my fence unannounced, peering over the boards like a sentry. "You know," she said once, smiling too wide, "we have community guidelines about property presentation. You might consider repainting your house. Faded exteriors can really hurt resale values." I told her I wasn't selling. She laughed softly. "Oh, nobody ever plans to sell, but things change." Then there was Todd Whitman, the retired cop. He drove around every evening in his golf cart, siren light flashing, radio crackling static. The first time he stopped me, it was because my trash bins were facing the wrong direction. The second time, it was because I appeared to be loitering on my own porch. By July, it wasn't about grass or mailboxes anymore. It was psychological warfare. I'd find tire tracks across my gravel drive where HOA inspectors had parked. Notes would appear under my door. "Compliance check completed. No issues noted at this time," which meant they'd been inside my property lines, maybe even closer. And then came the meeting. Lucinda sent the invitation herself. "Community assembly. Attendance mandatory for all adjacent property holders." It was held in the newly built community center with rows of identical folding chairs and a spread of cookies and bottled water. The air smelled faintly of bleach and artificial vanilla. When I arrived, conversation died instantly. Lucinda stood at the front of the room, flanked by Barry and Ellen. Behind them, a projector screen displayed a slide titled "Addressing Local Disruptions, the Harris Issue." I should have walked out right then, but I didn't. She started speaking in that practiced, syrupy tone. "As most of you are aware, there have been ongoing complications regarding property compliance on the eastern perimeter. We appreciate everyone's patience as we work to resolve this unfortunate situation." Then she clicked the remote. My face appeared on the screen, a photo taken without my knowledge. "Me loading lumber into my truck, Mr. Harris," she continued, "has repeatedly violated Maple Ridge regulations, trespassed on HOA-managed grounds, and obstructed community projects." Murmurs spread through the crowd. I felt the blood drain from my face. I stood up. "That's a lie. Lucinda didn't miss a beat. We have documentation." Barry passed out packets, printed photos, letters, even doctored maps. Every piece twisted just enough to look incriminating. I turned to the room, to the faces I'd grown up with, people who'd once known my family, my grandfather, our land. "You all know this isn't right," I said, voice shaking. "You know whose soil you're standing on?" "My family—" "Mr. Harris," Lucinda interrupted, "this isn't a debate. It's a community resolution process. You've been offered multiple chances to cooperate." "Cooperate?" I said. "You mean surrender?" "Please," she said, smiling again. "Lower your voice." The next day, I got my biggest fine yet, $20,500 for public disturbance and defamation of HOA officers. Victor told me to document everything. "They're overstepping, and it's going to bite them," he said. But even he sounded uncertain now. Every motion he filed hit a new delay. Every records request came back in review. It was as if someone higher up was pulling strings. That's when I started noticing the cameras, tiny black domes mounted under the eaves of nearby houses. "Security for the neighborhood," they said. But one of them faced directly at my porch, another at my driveway. I covered them with cardboard, and the next day I got another violation notice for tampering with HOA security property. It was endless, and through it all, the neighbors kept their distance. A few still waved when they thought Lucinda wasn't looking, but most avoided eye contact. Fear had settled over Maple Ridge like fog, until one night when someone knocked on my door. It was raining hard, the kind of storm that rattles the gutters and makes the sky flash white. I opened the door to find a man standing there, tall, soaked through, eyes darting like he'd run the whole way. He introduced himself as Derek Cole. He lived 3 streets over, near the retention pond. His voice trembled as he spoke. "They're doing it to me, too," he said. "The fines, the warnings. They said my deck violated setback lines. I built that deck 10 years ago. They just changed the rule." He handed me a folder, its edges warped from rain. Inside were photos, letters, and copies of checks, thousands of dollars in maintenance assessments. They told me if I didn't pay, Derek said, that they'd put a lien on my house, and that's when it hit me. It wasn't just about me. Lucinda's HOA had turned the entire neighborhood into a money machine, squeezing homeowners with bogus violations, burying them under legal jargon and threatening foreclosure if they resisted. And no one fought back, because the system was designed to make resistance look insane. That night, Derek and I sat in my kitchen, papers spread across the table, rain hammering the roof. He wasn't the only one. There were at least 6 others, families too scared to speak publicly. I promised him we'd expose it, but Maple Ridge wasn't about to let that happen. The next morning, I found my barn doors chained shut, a bright orange sticker across them. Unsafe structure, access, restricted by order of HOA compliance. The lock wasn't a normal padlock. It was tagged with a serial number and official, sealed. They'd filed something with the county. When I tried calling Lucinda, she didn't answer. But an hour later, Todd showed up in his golf cart, smirking like a man who'd just been handed a badge again. HOA authorization, he said. You're not allowed to enter until the inspection clears. What inspection? I demanded. He tapped his clipboard. Fire safety. Might take a few weeks, maybe months. I stood there in the rain, watching him drive off, and felt something shift inside me, the part that still believed playing by their rules could ever work. That night, I broke the lock. Inside the barn, everything looked untouched, at first. Then I saw it. The old wooden chest my grandfather had kept his ledgers in, now cracked open. Papers scattered across the dirt floor. They'd been inside. I gathered what I could, though much was torn or missing. Among the mess, one envelope survived, yellowed, water-stained, sealed with brittle wax. My grandfather's handwriting again, for whoever tries to take it back. Inside were old letters, correspondence between him and the original county surveyor, maps, coordinates, and one phrase that kept repeating in his notes. Boundary stones, proof of title. If those stones still existed, the same ones I'd found. Months ago, they could prove the HOA's land grab was built on falsified data. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I headed back to the oak grove where I'd found the first stone. Only this time, the field was gone, paved over. They'd extended the drainage pond. The stones were buried. Lucinda had moved faster than I thought possible. I remember standing there, mud-soaking my boots, watching a bulldozer idle where my family's history had once stood. Todd's golf cart pulled up behind me, his siren light blinking lazily. "Gotta keep off, Mr. Harris," he said. "Active construction zone," I turned to him. "You knew." "You all knew," he didn't answer. Just tightened his grip on the steering wheel and drove off. That night, my phone rang. It was Victor. His voice was low, urgent. "They filed an injunction," he said, "claiming you're interfering with community safety projects. They're pushing for a restraining order. Against me. On my own land." I don't remember hanging up. I just remember standing in the dark, staring at the farmhouse. The same walls my grandfather built, the same soil he'd worked, now fenced in by people who thought they could rewrite history with paperwork. And somewhere deep down, I realized this wasn't just about property lines anymore. Lucinda wasn't protecting Maple Ridge. She was hiding something inside it, because no one goes to these lengths just to defend a rule book. No one forges maps, buries evidence, and spies on neighbors just to keep lawns the same height. There was something else beneath the surface, something worth destroying me to protect, and whatever it was, I was going to find it, even if it meant burning Maple Ridge to the ground. The night everything came to a head didn't feel real at first. It was one of those humid evenings where the air clings to your skin, heavy and electric, like the world is holding its breath. I'd been pacing the farmhouse for hours, surrounded by piles of evidence, the letters, the maps, the forged signatures, the altered survey files I'd uncovered after breaking into the HOA's so-called maintenance shed. I had everything I needed to prove what Lucinda and her board had done: the illegal land seizure, the falsified property lines, the extortion hidden under compliance assessments. But knowing the truth and getting anyone to believe it were two different things. Lucinda's hold on the town was ironclad. She had half the local council eating out of her hand, the sheriff attending HOA luncheons, and a web of homeowners too afraid or too beaten down to fight her. But tonight was the HOA's annual meeting, and by their own rules, it was open to all members. Public record. Cameras allowed. If I was ever going to expose her, it had to be there. The drive to the community center felt longer than usual. The roads, slick from a recent rain, gleamed in the headlights. Every mailbox I passed was the same sterile white, identical, impersonal, like soldiers standing in perfect formation. As I turned onto Maple Ridge Boulevard, I could already see the glow from the center's windows, hear the low hum of conversation and clinking coffee cups. I parked my truck a block away. No need to make an entrance too soon. Inside the cab, I double-checked my folder, evidence labeled and organized, my grandfather's letters sealed in a plastic sleeve. On the passenger seat sat a small black recorder, blinking red. I'd started it before leaving the house. When I finally stepped inside, every head turned. The air felt colder somehow, like stepping into a courtroom. Rows of folding chairs faced a long table draped in white cloth. Behind it sat Lucinda, in her usual beige suit, flanked by Barry and Ellen. She smiled when she saw me, that same smile she wore at every confrontation. Too polished to be human. "Well," she said into the microphone, her voice echoing slightly, "it appears Mr. Harris has decided to join us after all." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I recognized a few faces, neighbors who'd stopped waving months ago. Some looked uneasy, others almost curious. Lucinda gestured to the back of the room. "Please take a seat. We'll address your concerns in due time." But I didn't move. I stayed standing in the aisle, holding my folder tight. "No," I said. "You'll address them now." The microphone caught the edge of my voice, sharp and trembling with months of frustration. Lucinda blinked slowly. "Excuse me?" "You've lied to this entire community," I said, stepping closer. "You've forged documents, moved property markers, and extorted thousands of dollars in fake fines. You think you own Maple Ridge, but you don't. And tonight, everyone's going to see exactly what you've done." Barry half rose from his chair. "Sit down, Harris," he barked. "You're out of order." I dropped the folder onto the table in front of them. Papers spilled out. Maps, letters, copies of checks, old photos of boundary stones half buried in dirt. The projector light from behind flickered across Lucinda's face, catching the faint tremor in her jaw. "Go ahead," I said, my voice steadying. "Tell them those aren't real. Tell them my grandfather's signature is fake, or that this county surveyor's seal doesn't exist." Lucinda's expression didn't break, but her hands, perfectly manicured, trembling now, reached for the papers. "This is nonsense," she said. "Conspiracy theories from a disgruntled former owner." "Owner?" I cut in. Funny you use that word. "Because according to the original deed, this entire eastern section, the one you're charging lot fees for, doesn't belong to Maple Ridge at all." The room buzzed. People began whispering. A few craned their necks toward the documents, snapping photos on their phones. Lucinda's mask cracked. "Barry," she said tightly. "Call security," but Barry hesitated. He was sweating, eyes darting to the crowd. "Lucinda," he muttered, "maybe we should just—" "Now!" she snapped. That's when the power flickered. At first I thought it was coincidence, the storm still rumbling in the distance, but then the projector went black, plunging the room into semi-darkness. Gasps rose from the crowd. The emergency lights kicked on, throwing everything into harsh red tones. Someone shouted near the back, "What's going on?" I turned toward the sound and froze. The doors, all 3 exits, were locked, and in that moment I understood. This wasn't panic. It was control. Lucinda's voice rang out, amplified even without power. "Mr. Harris," she said, her tone venom-sweet, "you've been warned repeatedly. You've trespassed, vandalized, harassed this board, and tonight you've crossed the line into criminal behavior." She pointed at me. 2 men stepped forward from the shadows near the stage. Private security, not police. Big, broad, identical black jackets with the HOA crest. "Remove him," she ordered. The crowd erupted. some shouting for calm, others backing away. But I wasn't about to let it end like that. I raised my phone high, thumb pressing record on the video. "You want to see the truth?" I shouted. "Fine, watch this." I tapped play on a clip I'd saved, footage from the night of the bulldozer trench. The screen flickered to life on the projector again as backup power returned. There it was, Lucinda herself, standing under a construction floodlight, giving orders to tear through the property line. Her voice was unmistakable. "Keep digging. If we bury those stones before inspection, he's got nothing." The room went silent. Lucinda lunged for the remote, but Barry stopped her this time. "Lucinda," he whispered, eyes wide, "what the hell is that?" She ignored him, her face ghost pale under the red light. "Fake," she hissed. "It's all fake." But the crowd wasn't buying it. Martha Jenkins, a clipboard queen herself, stood up from the second row, her face twisted in disbelief. "You said it was for drainage," she said. "You told us it was county approved." Lucinda didn't answer. Another neighbor, Derek, stood too. "You fined me over $3,000 for a deck that didn't violate anything. You said I'd lose my home." Voices piled over one another, outrage rising like a wave. The security guards froze, unsure which side to back. Lucinda grabbed the mic again, shouting over the noise. "Enough! You're all being manipulated by a bitter man who—" The screen behind her changed again. I hadn't touched the controls. The projector flickered, then displayed a new image, one I hadn't put there. It was an email chain, blown up large enough for everyone to read. The sender, Lucinda Ward. The recipient, County Development Authority. Subject, boundary adjustment proposal, expedite approval, attached donation agreement, and attached below, a scanned check, $50,000 from the Maple Ridge Beautification Fund. The room exploded. People surged forward, shouting, snapping pictures, waving papers. Barry backed away from the table, hands raised. Ellen looked like she might faint. Lucinda's voice cracked through the chaos, desperate now. "This is illegal. Whoever accessed those files—" "It's all public record," I said quietly. "You just counted on no one ever looking." She turned toward me, and for the first time, the mask was gone. Her face twisted with pure, unfiltered hatred. "You think this makes you a hero?" She hissed. "You've destroyed your own community. You've ruined everything." I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only she could hear. "No, Lucinda." "You did?" Then the sirens started. Real ones this time. Police cars flooded the parking lot outside, blue and red lights slicing through the night. I didn't call them. I didn't have to. Someone in the crowd must have sent the video live. It was already spreading. The officers stormed in, splitting through the shouting crowd. "Everyone step back." One shouted. Lucinda tried to talk her way out of it. She always did. "This is private property. You have no jurisdiction." But when the officers approached the table, they weren't looking at me. They were looking at her. One handed her a folder, the same evidence packet I'd filed with the county weeks ago. Signed warrants. Official investigations into HOA fraud, falsified zoning, and unlawful liens. Her voice broke into disbelief. This is a mistake." But even as they cuffed her, even as Barry and Ellen shrank back like children, she turned to me with a smile, cold, unshaken. "You think this ends with me?" she whispered. "You have no idea what you've started." Outside, the storm had returned. Rain hammered the pavement as the officers led her out. Neighbors spilled into the street, arguing, crying, filming everything. I stood at the edge of it all, drenched, exhausted, but finally free. At least that's what I told myself, because even as Lucinda's car disappeared down the road, flashing lights fading into darkness, something still gnawed at me, the system she built, the fines, the control, the fear. It didn't vanish with her. It had roots deeper than anyone wanted to admit. The Vice President Barry was already on his phone, whispering into it, face pale. But for that one night the illusion cracked. The people saw neighbors I hadn't spoken to in months came up to me, their voices shaky with shame and gratitude. "We didn't know," one woman said. "We were scared," I nodded. I understood. As the police cleared the scene, I walked back to my truck. The storm had eased, leaving only the low rumble of thunder in the distance. The farmhouse lights were still on, faint and warm against the dark fields. For the first time in months, I let myself breathe. But when I reached the porch, I saw something waiting on the steps, a single white envelope. No stamp, no address. Just my name, handwritten in neat, looping cursive. Inside was a single sentence. You exposed the wrong people. The paper smelled faintly of vanilla, Lucinda's perfume. I looked out across the dark stretch of Maple Ridge. The perfect rows of houses, the empty streets, the uniform mailboxes gleaming under the wet streetlights. For a moment I thought I saw movement, a curtain shifting, a shadow slipping away from a window. Maybe it was paranoia, or maybe the real enemy had never been one woman at all. Either way, the fight wasn't over, not yet, because somewhere out there, behind those perfect white fences and manicured lawns, someone was still watching, waiting for the next time I dared to challenge the rules, and I had no doubt that the next battle would be even darker. The morning after the arrest, Maple Ridge didn't look the same. It was quiet, not the normal suburban quiet of sprinklers and joggers, but something deeper, hollow. The kind of silence that settles after a storm has torn everything apart. I woke up before sunrise, the kind of restless sleep where every sound makes you sit up. The rain from last night had cleared, but the world outside still looked bruised, the streets slick with silver puddles, the trees bending slightly under leftover wind. When I stepped out onto the porch, I could see it, the community center down the hill, police tape still fluttering in the breeze. The banner for the annual HOA Appreciation Dinner was half torn, one corner whipping free in the wind. A small group of reporters stood near the entrance, coffee in hand, waiting for someone to talk. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel afraid to be seen. I drove down to town later that morning just to see it for myself. People were gathered in small clusters. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in months now huddled together, whispering about everything that had happened. Every conversation started the same way. Did you hear? Can you believe it? I always knew something wasn't right. It was surreal watching the same people who used to look through me now look at me. Really look. Some nodded in quiet thanks. Others avoided eye contact altogether, guilt shadowing their faces. By noon, the story had spread beyond Maple Ridge. The local news ran footage of the meeting, my voice echoing through the room. The video of Lucinda ordering the bulldozer, the look on her face when the email chain appeared. Reporters stood at the HOA entrance like vultures. And though part of me wanted to hide, another part, the part that had been buried under months of humiliation, felt something close to peace. That afternoon, I met with Detective Alvarez at the sheriff's office. She'd been the one who took over the case after the arrest. Her office was stacked with boxes, labeled evidence, financials, HOA fund ledgers. You did a hell of a thing, she said, flipping through a file. You cracked open something bigger than just one board, I frowned. What do you mean? She leaned back in her chair. Lucinda wasn't just running a power trip. She had connections, real ones. County assessors, a zoning clerk, even a developer she was feeding contracts to. The so-called beautification fund was a money funnel. Kickbacks, inflated bids, bribes. She slid a photograph across the desk, a copy of that same donation check, with notes scribbled in red ink. We've traced every cent. She's not walking away from this one, I exhaled slowly. Relief, exhaustion, something in between. She'll face charges? I asked. Fraud, falsifying public records, conspiracy, unlawful liens, and likely tax evasion, Alvarez said. It's going federal. That was the first time I felt the weight start to lift. For months, it had been me against a wall of silence. But now, finally, there was proof. When I left the station, I drove back through the neighborhood. It looked almost normal again. Kids on bikes, sprinklers turning lawns into mist. But if you looked closely, you could see the fractures. Signs had been taken down. The HOA office was boarded shut. Someone had spray-painted "No More Tyrants" across the mailbox kiosk. The illusion was breaking. 2 weeks later, the county held a public forum, open to all residents, media invited. The town hall overflowed. People were standing in the aisles, holding copies of fines, letters, and notices, all the weapons the HOA had used against them. This time, I didn't sit at the back. I stood at the front, beside a long oak table where Alvarez and a few council members laid out the results of the investigation. When she spoke, the crowd went dead silent. After reviewing the financial and legal evidence, she said, "The Maple Ridge Homeowners Association is hereby suspended pending formal dissolution. Control of all community funds and assets will be transferred to an interim management committee, made up of residents, not board members." People gasped. A few even clapped, but it wasn't celebration yet. It was disbelief. Then Martha Jenkins, the clipboard queen herself, stood up. Her voice shook. "We should have seen it," she said softly. "All of us. We let her scare us. We let her tell us what to do, how to live. I don't know how to fix that." No one said anything for a long time. Then Derek, the guy with the deck fine, spoke from the back. "Maybe we start by not letting fear decide who runs this place." That's when the applause started. Slow at first, then swelling until the entire hall was on its feet. It wasn't victory in the Hollywood sense, no fireworks, no cinematic embrace, but it was something real, collective, healing. Over the next few weeks, the neighborhood began to look different, not in design, but in spirit. The new committee voted to suspend all pending fines, refund illegal charges, and review every single property violation issued under Lucinda's leadership. They even set up a small community garden on the empty lot she once planned to beautify for her developer friends. People who hadn't spoken in years started showing up at each other's doors with coffee, sharing stories about how they'd been intimidated, silenced, or threatened. There were tears, apologies, and something that looked a lot like forgiveness. One afternoon, Martha came to my porch. She held a small potted fern. "You said once this place needed more life," she said. "Figured this was a good start." We sat on the porch for a long time, watching the light fade over the street. For the first time, it felt like Maple Ridge belonged to the people who actually lived there, not to signatures on a ledger. But peace, I learned, isn't instant. It's fragile. A few weeks after the dissolution, I started receiving strange letters again. No threats this time, just silence inside the envelopes, blank pages. Sometimes they smelled faintly of perfume. I'd tear them up and throw them in the fire, but they'd keep coming. No return address. When I mentioned it to Alvarez, she said it was probably just residue from the fallout. Angry supporters, old board members in denial. But deep down, I wasn't sure. Lucinda had disappeared from the county jail 2 weeks after her arraignment. Official story said she'd been transferred to another facility pending trial. But no one could tell me which one. The local paper ran a brief update. Ward cooperating with federal investigators. Nothing else. That should have been enough for me. But every time I passed those uniform white fences at dusk, every time the streetlights flickered just a second too long, I felt that same chill. Like someone was still pulling strings, somewhere higher. Still, life moved on. I rebuilt the fence she'd ordered, torn down. I replanted the trees she'd had removed for visibility compliance. And when the new HOA-free neighborhood council came by to ask if I'd serve as chair, I almost said no. But then I remembered the night of the meeting, the locked doors, the flashing lights, the crowd shouting for truth, and I said yes. The first motion I passed as chair was simple. No fines, no threats, no hidden rules. Every policy, every spending decision, every enforcement action, all of it had to be voted on by the community, not a board. Some people said it wouldn't last. That communities need control, structure, hierarchy. Maybe they're right. But control had almost destroyed us once. I wasn't about to let it happen again. Months passed. Spring arrived, soft and tentative. The lawns were greener, the houses brighter, the air lighter somehow. Even the mailboxes, those cold white sentinels, seemed less menacing now that they weren't instruments of power. The town started to heal in small ways. The Jenkins son, who had been grounded for painting his skateboard ramp bright red, got invited to help repaint the community benches. Derek built a small wooden gazebo at the park entrance with the words, "For Everyone," carved into the top beam. It wasn't perfect. It never would be. But, for the first time, it felt alive. One evening, I found myself walking past the old HOA office. The boards over the windows were weathered, peeling. The sign had been taken down. leaving only the outline of the letters behind, faint ghosts of what once ruled over everyone here. Through a crack in the boards I could see inside. Dust hung thick in the air. The room was empty except for one thing, the long, white table where Lucinda had sat during every meeting. For a second, I thought about what it had felt like, standing there in front of her, voice shaking but unbroken, staring down a woman who thought she owned everything. And then I realized something. I didn't hate her anymore. Hate had been the leash she used to control people. Fear had been her language. I wasn't speaking it anymore. I walked away from the office and didn't look back. Summer came and went. The news eventually stopped covering Maple Ridge. Other scandals replaced ours, other villains, other towns. But sometimes I'd get emails from strangers across the country. Homeowners who'd seen the video, people who'd fought their own battles against HOAs that had gone too far. They all said the same thing. You gave us courage. Funny how one small act of defiance can echo far beyond your street. Then one night, months later, I got a call from Detective Alvarez. Her voice sounded tight. "You might want to sit down," she said. Lucinda Ward had been found dead in a motel 2 states over. Apparent overdose. But something in her tone told me it wasn't that simple. "She left a note," Alvarez said quietly. "It just said, 'You can't uproot what's buried deep.'" For a long time after that, I didn't speak. Didn't move. Maybe she was right. Maybe corruption like hers doesn't die with one person. Maybe it just waits, hiding in new faces, new systems, new smiles. But as I stood on my porch that night, looking out over the quiet street, I realized something else. Even if you can't kill the system, you can starve it. One act of courage, one refusal, one truth at a time. The porch light flickered as the wind picked up. Somewhere a dog barked. A single leaf tumbled across the road, catching in the beam of the streetlight. I thought of my grandfather, the man who'd built this land with his hands, the man whose letters had started it all. I imagined him standing beside me, smiling that calm, knowing smile of his. "You did all right, son," I could almost hear him say. "You gave it back." And maybe that was the point. Not to win, not to destroy, but to take back what fear had stolen. I turned off the light and stepped inside. The storm was finally gone, but before I closed the door, I looked out one last time at the neighborhood, at the houses, the trees, the rebuilt fences glowing under the soft amber lamps, and I asked myself, almost whispering, when we build communities to keep people in line, at what point do we stop calling them communities and start calling them prisons? The wind didn't answer, but maybe it didn't need to, because for the first time in years, Maple Ridge felt like home again.